Well, hello and welcome back to the All Saints podcast. I'm here with your deacon, my good friend, Justin Durst. Welcome, Justin. Thanks for joining me.
Well, thanks for having me.
So we've got a bunch of stuff that I'd like to talk about today, and we meet up fairly regularly, not as frequently as I'd like, but we talk about all kinds of things, your work and ministry of the church and stuff that I've been teaching and things that are going on in the life of the congregation. And I want to get into some of those because you had some really thought-provoking things to say just when we spoke a few days ago. But before we do that, I'm conscious there'll be some people listening and watching who either know you but only a little bit or don't know you very much at all.
Yeah.
So give us a quick 2-minute potted sketch of the life and family and Justin Durst. What do you get up to?
Okay. Married with 3 boys. My wife's name is Alicia. My boys in order of age going from oldest to youngest are Abraham, Jeremiah, and Boaz. And anybody who comes to know us, comes over to our house, knows that we also have 2 dogs, Bitzer and Gandalf. And then beyond that, 2 cats and a bunch of chickens and whatever the boys find. So that's a quick summary of the home life.
I love that your dogs are called Bitzer and Gandalf.
Yeah.
And Bitzer, just in case some of our younger listeners might not recognise, tell us where the name Bitzer comes from.
From Shaun the Sheep.
From Shaun the Sheep. It's the dog that gets his face splattered in the opening credits.
That's right.
Right. So this is going to be significant, perhaps, for what we talk about in a few minutes' time. Tell us about your work and what you get up to during the week.
I'm a branch manager for a wholesale steel distributor in North Fort Worth, and what that really means is I'm in charge of what I consider the 3 parts of the company, which are the sales, admin, and operations department. So the operations are the people who are moving the cranes, loading the steel, driving the steel, delivering the steel. The admin's everything in between, and I think everybody has some conception of what sales is.
Right. Yeah. And what's interesting, we've talked over a number of years since we've got to know each other, which actually was more or less as soon as we arrived at All Saints. I think you were visiting maybe during one of our visits before we came here in 2020.
Yeah.
But it's been that kind of time.
Yeah.
And one of the things that's really struck me is the way in which you have so self-consciously sought to apply the teaching of Scripture to work and the workplace. We had you on the men's discipleship breakfast with Tony Douglas, one of our elders, talking about that. So maybe we'll get to that. But you had an observation about some of the themes that were coming out of 2 Timothy, which we've been working through here in our sermons on Sundays. And I wondered if you could just flesh that out, develop that a bit for us. What was on your mind? And then we can go from there.
First of all, I always love hearing the preaching and the teaching. I want to say that. And I'm thankful that it's thought-provoking. But what I was thinking about is while you were explaining the obvious, Paul's obvious pointing to Timothy accepting suffering as a sign of the faith and the live life in this world, you brought out how we can look back and reflect on the suffering of others who came before us. What I considered and what I started musing on was that in this day and age, I think there's more that has changed that we're not even conscious of how it affects us totally. And so maybe the lack of suffering that we see that compares to those times is a fruit of our post-millennial hope that things have changed, and maybe we're not facing the same kind of suffering, but now we're faced with a different kind of suffering,
right,
which is brought upon because of this age.
Right. Oh, and it's worth making the point, if only as an expression of gratitude for the blessings of the age that we live in. You only have to say the words dental anesthetic to see very clearly how the Lord has blessed us in 21st century America, and with the fruits of scientific and medical advances, which actually stem from a Christian worldview. And if you think, a good amount of work has been done on this about the whole scientific endeavor flows from the recognition that the creation is an ordered, structured thing, which it was Christians who had that assertion. And also after the Reformation, the recovery of the dignity of manual work, secular work, meant that you could do experiments and not be thought a commoner. A gentleman like Newton could be an experimental scientist and people wouldn't think that he lost his marbles. And so just to say you know, nothing we want to point to should be taken as an expression of ingratitude for where we are. But at the same time, we have some challenges in our age, which it'd be interesting just to reflect on. What things do you have in mind as you think about that?
Well, I mean, one, this is something we talked about, and you, I think Randy Ruth brought this up, and you requoted it to me. But
Right.
for example, being a young man in ages past, there weren't images of women everywhere.
Right.
And now we live in an age where it's just thrown on billboards, on TV screens, on computer screens, on the sides of cups, advertisements at gas stations, everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that is I want to say it rightly. With the Spirit of God, we know that from right and wrong, but it is a battle that wasn't faced by other men previously, other young men especially, I think, to not put your eyes where they don't belong.
Right. Well, this is, I mean, Randy Booth's way of framing it. I don't know whether he mentioned that here or whether I had a conversation with him on another occasion. He just pointed out the obvious fact that if you went back to early post-Reformation Europe, the average 18-year-old boy had in a rural community had probably seen 100 or 200 females in his life in a small village, right? And a small fraction of those would be his own age and potential objects for physical attraction. And if you imagine how a faithful young lad, a faithful young man would be seeking to live in that kind of context. I mean, and we know some of this because we've got letters from people like Samuel Rutherford writing 100 or so years later. Samuel Rutherford was he was a Scottish pastor and theologian in the 17th century. And we've got preserved many of his letters. And we've got letters that he wrote to young men. And he's got these little lines of advice for them about exactly what you said, keeping their eyes to themselves. And, the young lady who you see at church on Sunday and gathering sheaves in the cornfield next to where you're working in the blacksmith shop, keep your eyes on your work, young man, and don't let them sort of drift and don't let your thoughts wander. And you can imagine that young lad being transplanted to Fort Worth in the 21st century and just like, how can we conceivably begin to face up to this challenge? And of course, so he's traded in effect one bunch of challenges of being mostly tired, cold, hungry most of the time, never lying down to sleep in a bed with clean sheets, mostly being exhausted and being hungry most of the time. He's traded all that for a situation in which the challenges to our faithfulness just come from a completely different direction. And one wonders, that happens sufficiently slowly that we don't notice it, but sufficiently quickly that we don't grow up in time to deal with it.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that issue of maturity, that humanity is not maturing fast enough to deal with the challenges that we're facing. Is that, I mean, we talked about that before. Give us your thoughts on that.
I would even say it's prolonging infancy.
Right.
I mean, given the tools that we have now to communicate, and using them the wrong way just reinforces, pleasure with the wrong things. And then how does somebody grow out of that if they're not disciplined to grow out of it, or they're not having somebody watch over them to grow out of it? I mean, I was thinking back about what you just said about having the changes of, the Scottish boy versus where we're at now too.
Yeah.
I think that's part of like we said, all the good things that we've got in this age. Now, so much is done for us that we have. How do we continue to be productive? Where being a blacksmith took all day.
Right.
Where right now some of the jobs people do can get done on computers extremely fast, and machines are doing it. And so what do we do with our time and not fall into constant boredom looking for something to do.
Mm-hmm. So
And
it strikes me that we've got, this is a benefit of being familiar with history and biographies of Christians from the past, that
Mhm.
it's like one step more granular, isn't it? If we say we can observe the things that they had to do in order to live faithfully, that we can superficially get away with not having,
Mm-hmm.
like that kind of diligence.
Mm-hmm.
Like if you had enough food that you were physically able to work in medieval Europe, and you weren't working, you probably wouldn't have enough food
Mm-hmm.
pretty soon. But we can get away with it for so much longer. You know, the world doesn't come crashing down around our ears if we sleep in for a week during harvest. But then what that also alerts us to is, you know, what are the challenges that we do face that they didn't? And I wonder if one way of parsing that challenge is to say we have much more of a problem than we realize we have. Maybe that's
Yes,
the way of putting it.
absolutely.
Right. So we've the perennial danger is to heal the wound lightly, right? So the temptations of images presenting opportunities for lust and enticements to lust, and pornography and advertising, and like you said, the side of coffee cups. People can't sell double glazing in England, or air conditioning in Texas without having pictures of semi-naked women plastered on the advertisements. We have much more of a problem than we realize we have. Maybe that's the way of crystallizing it.
I completely agree. I think maybe we don't realize how much conquering we have to do, and it's not just a bad government official. Like we're now trying to, in a new age. I think I genuinely, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are maybe deeper waters.
Right.
You know, and we're trying to learn how to swim faithfully right now.
Yeah. So, navigating that then, I mean, do you have any practical observations? I mean, your job brings you into contact with a few dozen people who report to you. You must see some texture there in how the guys are operating, and then of course you've got family and you see people around the church. Do you have any practical thoughts about how that could set us down the road to evaluating and dealing with these challenges appropriately?
Specifically in a work context, I think the one transferable good that you can bring to the workplace that is obvious to any employer is a good work ethic. It's not coming up with the best idea. It's not any of those things. It's just good solid work ethic brings all kinds of opportunities. People notice that more than they do anything else in this day and age. And I think it comes back to, again, what we previously touched on. So many things can be done that encourages people to just slack off. When you see somebody who's going at it hard all the time, there's opportunities. There will be. Maybe there's patience that's needed, but there will be.
Yeah.
And practically, husbands, love your wives like Christ loved the church. I mean, I personally think that you said this before, but the difference between, or Pastor Booth did actually, the difference between struggling with something and actually surrendering to it. Really take all that misplaced attention, put it on your wife, and and the expulsive power of a new affection.
Yes. And,
and then for younger people, well, maybe instead of thinking so hard about something that hasn't arrived yet, think hard about what's here so you can prepare for that.
Yes.
I think that's a good practical start.
So that's the in one sense that's the sweet spot of all of this reflection on the impact of technology, right? Because okay, if you're talking to adults, which we both do quite a lot, I certainly do a fair amount in terms of their own personal disciplines and godliness. Talk to adults about their habits of technology use. Okay, but if we have younger people, in a sense, you have the opportunity in talking to somebody who is between the age of 10 or even younger, and 20, 22, maybe 25, whatever, you have the opportunity to forge new habits and to inculcate a way of disciplining themselves that is going to bear fruit in the long term.
Mm-hmm.
And maybe the way to put it, it is when you're 16, 17, 18 years old, marriage feels a long way away.
Mm-hmm.
And if you hear somebody saying, well, you ought to be preparing yourself for that future context in which the desires you're feeling can find legitimate and godly expression, it can just feel like, you don't really understand. And I want to say, right, in a certain sense, no, I don't.
Mm-hmm.
I've no idea what it's like to be a 16-year-old with a smartphone.
Mm-hmm.
But here's where Christian moral responsibility steps up. So we don't make the inference from saying this is really, really difficult to saying, throw your hands up, well, there's not much I can do. What we do when we realize we have a serious problem is we apply ourselves to it with a commensurate degree of intensity and commitment and focus. So same with, actually it's the same with anything. If you sit down and talk with prospective or new parents about what it's actually like to raise a young child, you could scare them off. I mean, you because the realities are so all-consuming and so hard to manage, and that's if everything is going well. If you have a child with a sickness, or if you have some other issue which arises that makes parenting more difficult than normal, then you just jack up the intensity of that. But the purpose of saying we have a very, very significant challenge ahead of us is not to provide extenuating circumstances for giving up. It is to seek to encourage people to focus their attention on fixing and addressing the problem. Mm. And that's one of the reasons why I have emphasized, I nearly said belabored, maybe I have belabored, right? But no. I emphasized the point over an extended period of time about the dangers of communications technologies, social media, and so on. It's partly because I know firsthand how great the temptations just to be constantly on my email are, and constantly distracted. I know those temptations, and I don't want us to dress the wound lightly.
No,
and neither do I want us to give up. I want us to realize we have a massive problem, and we're going to have to tackle it if we're going to be a faithful church community and faithful families and faithful Christians.
I think in talking about this, I don't think there's anybody who I know at our church, or anybody I know that has testosterone, right, at least, would not say they want to conquer.
Right.
And conquer for good purposes. Mm-hmm. I think maybe what we're missing is understanding that conquering is a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
It's not something that's light. It takes a lot of self-discipline. It takes a lot of pushing through when you're tired. It takes a lot of giving more when you feel like you've given enough. And it's facing these exact kinds of challenges, like the phone, the TV, the whatever it may be.
Video games.
Well,
whatever.
Or just, I'm bored.
Yeah.
Like, well, what do? Find something to do and push at it. Yeah.
Well, and I was listening to an economist, or two economists talking recently about this issue of boredom. Mm-hmm. And one of the things they highlighted was there's a sense in which it's the oldest problem in human history, because most people, for most of the time, have been undernourished, so they've not had the energy to work as much as they could. And you actually see this in some developing countries today, where you go to villages and you see people just sitting around lethargically, and if you said to them, well, why are you not working? They might say, well, there's nothing to do, or there's nothing I can do. The reality is they don't have the caloric intake necessary to dig a little deeper in their field to try and generate a little bit more fertility in the soil and grow more crops. They don't have that capacity. So in a sense, boredom is the oldest problem in the world for people who are faced with work that needs doing. But what we've done is, for the first time in human history, really, in the last 3 generations, we have combined that with sufficient caloric intake that we now have no excuse.
Mm-hmm.
Like there's not anybody, certainly not in our community here, and probably nobody in modern America, who couldn't do something productive for lack of caloric intake. If you frame it like that, it's like, oh wow,
yeah.
So all of the jobs that I might regard as menial, just around the house or whatever they are productive, fruitful in God's purposes, potentially, and I can do them. I'm in this privileged position in the last 100 years or so of human history to have the energy to actually get out my sofa and get on with the job.
Mm-hmm. You saying that is it just reminds me of certain things. I've got boys that have a lot of energy, and they can vouch for this. But like, told them you can't conquer the world if you can't take out the trash.
Right. Yeah, I like that.
You can't conquer the world if you can't do the little things, because it's mainly about what's in us, not what the task is.
Well, that's a point Mark Horn makes in. Have you read what's his book? Solomon Says.
I have it, but I haven't read it yet.
Yeah, you should definitely read it. It's a great book, and your boys would love it, especially well, actually they all would.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the he connects that to the point of Genesis 1, dominion. So if humanity's task is to take dominion over the created order, then that task has to be exercised in relation to the whole created order, and it has to begin with yourself. So it's a fascinating way of framing the challenge, because I think there is, in our theological circles, in our church circles, actually, the idea of dominion is viscerally attractive, especially to young men. And I think that's good. I think I want to encourage that.
Yeah.
I love that there are guys who just want to see the world more Christ-shaped, and they want to act in such a way that they are contributing to the world becoming a better place to be and more honoring to the Lord Jesus Christ. And then if you say, okay, great. So when you are resisting temptation, whether it's temptation to laziness or immature speech or sexual temptation or whatever it is, you're conquering the world. It's just you're conquering the bit that's really close to home,
and the toughest part.
Yes, it's also the part which is not just toughest in the sense that it keeps coming back to bite us. You know, we're not perfectionists in the theological sense, so we know we're never going to be over this temptation, whatever it is. But it's the one where, in our more cynical moments, we'll be the quickest to find excuses to back away from that. Like Calvin once said the human heart is a factory of idols. I'm inclined to say the human heart is a factory of excuses for not engaging in the fight.
Footnote for the Institutes.
Yeah. I want to come back to just the work point, because there's something that struck me, and it was in connection with a young lady who's recently started her first part-time job. She's still at school, a young lady in the church. She's working for a fast food joint. And literally in the space of a couple of weeks, I think it was less than 3 weeks, maybe it was less than 2, she had her first informal appraisal. And her boss had noticed how well she'd been doing, and praised her for it, and said, and some of the other staff were saying, hey, I want to go on a shift with this lady. I don't want to go with him and her. Or can you put me on shift with him, because they work in pairs. And it just struck me what a fantastic opportunity a good workplace is. I know not all workplaces are like this, but a good workplace is so meritocratic. The Christ-likeness shows really fast. If you're, now maybe a fast food joint is the limiting case of this, because the impact is so immediate. If you're working in something where there's a longer lead time to product production or whatever it is, it's harder to make it's a longer term process. But in principle, a good workplace in a market economy like ours is a place for Christian virtue to shine.
I can tell you, even at my business, we have people like that in different spots that show up, and they haven't even been there that long, and their work ethic is very obvious, and it makes people take notice.
Yeah.
The supervisors like them. The operations manager tells me about them, and I've heard other stories about other people who work at the church being in the same situations too. But yeah, it is a remarkable opportunity to just take hold of a good thing. Work itself is not bad.
Yeah, no,
I think that's another thing that we don't need to go too far off on, but it actually came before the curse.
Yeah.
Well
spotted.
Yeah.
Because 1 is below 3.
Yeah. So work is a great thing if we actually do it.
Yeah.
First of all, we can see how much we enjoy, and it does show very clearly.
Well, I wonder if that's an insight into how Christian employers could work to make their businesses more Christian, is to find ways of providing a more immediate or tactile or responsive feedback structure to their staff. It's something I've never thought of till you just kind of mentioned it in your workplace, but I do occasionally have people asking me, they're Christians, and maybe they work for themselves with a couple of people working for them, they're small business kind of context, or maybe in a larger business like you're in, they've got people reporting to them. And the questions that they ask about how do I function as a Christian employer often presuppose a background which is, there's this issue of ideological conflict, we've got wokeness in the workplace, we've got DEI stuff from the board coming down, what do we do with this? Or we've got some ethical conflict in relation to the provision of a service to a customer who's compromised in some way. And all those are significant problems. But here's an avenue for a Christian employer to cultivate a workplace which in the long term is going to be more Christ-like. It's to be responsive to Christ-like labour. If your staff get the hang of the fact that the way to do well around here is to be like Jesus, then firstly, the Christians will shine. And secondly, those who aren't Christians, to the extent that they see good role models being rewarded well among the believers, will be attracted to that just by the mechanics of the incentives that you're building. But I don't know whether you're self-conscious about doing that. If I frame it in that way, is that something you're self-conscious of doing?
Well, I mean, it's not that I have that kind of control over where I'm at to come up with every single incentive, but I do have some. And we do have a program where each month we have a employee of the month. And the employee of the month is not elected by a vote of democracy, but I do ask for everybody's input, and they give me that so I can see the things that I'm not seeing. And that particular person, we bring them up, and there's a couple things that we look for always, which are the feedback that I get from other people is hardworking, safe, like those kind of things. So we reinforce it by that person doing that, being productive. I mean, I would say hardworking, being productive. You can't be productive if you're not hardworking. It just won't happen. Being safe is a big key because we work with steel and
heavy things.
Heavy things, and So in a way, we reinforce it that way. And I believe at this point, when we've had some people who've stayed around for a while, even the new ones come in. That's what I'm always consciously trying to affect culture, not just one specific stat, because culture is reinforcing.
Right.
You get around other people that understand the way the system works, and if we can raise the standards high enough, then everybody who comes in has to fall into those standards because they can't change everybody.
Right.
If we raise it up, so for a person to be employee of the month, they get a restaurant gift card, a front row parking spot, and now we've got a car wash for a month for them.
Right.
So it's great, and they get a picture on a wall.
Yeah.
And then it hangs on the wall for the whole month. For the whole month, but then it goes into the hall of all the previous employee of the month, and we have it sitting there, and you can look and know that all of them are on the board because they were, I would say, work hard, productive, and did something that benefited the whole in an obvious way.
I wanted to ask you a question, and it's related to that issue of the culture of the workplace. Have you noticed that some workplaces or some communities of people have a certain intangible vibe that's a positive vibe to it, and it's hard to discern where that comes from particularly because another group of people in what looks superficially like the same kind of structure and circumstances, and all trying to do the same sorts of things, the vibe is just very different. That must be something that you encounter as an employer.
Mm-hmm.
What's going on with that? Have you put your finger on what it is that creates that? If I call it a vibe, I think you know what I mean. But there must be a way of describing it that's more precise.
I think it goes back to Paul saying, "Imitate me, like I imitate Christ." A church is going to be like the preacher, and a workplace is going to be like the boss.
Right.
I really think I see it pretty much that way. I mean, if you're the boss and you are responsible for company policy, for doing things like we're saying, rewarding good work, for disciplining bad work, for hiring and firing, then one, teaching people how to work is better. I one of the things I look for, and especially in my sales group, is we work with a commodity, so the price goes up and down.
Right.
Sometimes we're in the system you look and it's like we're making good money, and other times because it just overnight our steel just got devalued tremendously.
Right.
Then you look in the system and we're not making money. Well, should I stand up and freak out and pull out my hair, or should I just go, okay, here's what you need to do. We need to sell as much as we can right now and just keep it going. If we do that, we've achieved what we need to achieve to be better in the future. So I take the pulse of like the sales group. Are they getting upset? Are they getting nervous? Or are they selling and still maintaining a good attitude? Because if they're doing that, then they're going to keep working, keep doing things well. They've got the vision, they've got the hope, and it continues. So
you've got an issue there, among other things, of the alignment of incentives between the staff and the business as a whole. Now, in a perfect world, then the things that all the staff want, just insofar as they perceive their role in the business, align perfectly with the outcomes of the company itself. Of course, in a context, let's say you've got a sales team, and people are remunerated in part on the basis of how many sales they sign off on, then you've got a danger of an internal competitive market between the sales staff. Now, maybe that's not a bad thing, or maybe it is a bad thing, but do you have ways in your own mind of addressing the issue of divergent incentives within the business, people wanting different things that conflict with each other?
Yeah, I think that it's having conversations with people, because sometimes their thinking is not right, and they're missing certain steps to what their job looks like or their productivity. And I will say that one thing I've thought about is just a recent case is somebody wanting more pay because they've been with the company for a while.
Right.
The problem is they've not matured. So they're in a position that it becomes really difficult to justify more. Had the person matured, they'd probably be in different positions right now.
Right.
And that's so the incentive. In that case, what somebody thinks about the way the incentive structure works is not. Let's just say it's got a flaw in it.
Right.
So I think the bigger issue is it goes back to, again, us conquering ourselves. You have to do it in workplace just like you have to do at home to progress.
When it highlights the importance of the relationship within which you're able to give meaningful, constructive feedback. In a sense, it's almost like it's a little like being a pastor or being a father, and you certainly know what it's like to be one of those things, where you want to give those for whom you're responsible enough direction concerning the things that you don't think are where they ought to be, that they can respond to that. If you've got an employee who's underperforming, who doesn't realize that he's underperforming because he's never had any feedback that directs him towards what you'd like him to do, it's hard to blame him when he doesn't produce. Whereas if you've got a structure that says, where he's been repeatedly encouraged to take a certain attitude towards his colleagues, or to try a certain route towards getting sales or doing his job, and he just hasn't done it, at that point you can say, listen, so we can give you more money when you start paying attention to what you've been told to do. And
No, Yeah, we have those. I mean, we have conversations with people at different times,
Right.
and then we have official times to have conversations that are recorded.
Yeah.
So that's all been there.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
yeah.
I think that goes back to I've been in some different work environments in the past than where I'm at now. I've been with my company for a while, so I'm very comfortable where I'm at. But just thinking about this again goes back to what we deal with in this age. I think
Right. Right.
we get a very inflated view of ourselves. It's hard to see the boy who's a blacksmith going to his father or his neighbor saying, "I should be paid more. I should have better hours. I think we should change the way we do everything here."
Yeah.
Where
Yes.
now, and I think it's because of things like the business shows we see on TV or the partial histories we get of how companies grew and people became
Right.
famous, that
Yes.
we think that we're ready to just do everything, and
Mm.
we're really not. That's why it's stay at what we're doing, master what you're doing, and then you're going to be in a better position down the road.
Well, that's an interesting thought. The apprentice blacksmith going into the shop to tell his new boss all the new things he learned at college and the way that we should organize our DEI programs in 17th century rural German smithy, right?
Yeah.
That's not going to last for more than about 5 seconds. And I wonder if a way of framing that is to say, in some societies, in well-functioning societies, there are inbuilt social structures that reinforce the proper expectations of how a person ought to function in the workplace. So in other words, the workplace is not abstracted from a broader society in which you just respect those who are older than you. You respect those who are in positions of authority, and you only get into those positions of authority by being competent and experienced.
And doing what you're told.
So now, of course, that can go sideways where you've got kind of capture of a set of posts in a business, or a whole business can be captured by jobs for the boys kind of mentality, and you end up being people. Everyone gets promoted to the level of their own incompetence.
Yeah.
But in principle, there's a way of recovering that appropriate social structure within a workplace where we make the assumption that, okay, my boss is my boss for a reason. And let's start with that.
And I want to add there that having come from, and I know there's others in our church who've done the same, but having come from being at a sales desk into management, I can tell you once you get into management, you can see things that you can't see from the sales desk.
Right.
And so...
Can you give some examples, what you have in mind?
Oh, like just talking about the changes we should make, or why can't we do it this way or that way? It's because you can't see the way the larger thing functions. And there's a reason why we do it this way. I just need you to work on doing it this way the best you can.
Yes.
And things will work better. And so that's what I think one of the temptations, again, of being in a position, if you will just work at what the manager tells you to do and do that the best with a good work ethic, you will rise quickly.
Right,
because increasingly in this age, there's always another way to do things.
Right. But if you're, again, forgive me parsing it in a slightly different way, but if you're basically content to say, all right, I realize I don't understand the whole way this business works, but you're asking me to do this job, and you then trust, if I do this job well, I'm going to be playing my part in the larger structure of this organization. I'm happy to be a bit player and contribute to this larger set of goals. And you'll discover, if your boss knows what he's doing, let's make that assumption, then actually will contribute, because he sees the big picture and you don't.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right. And I don't want to make this sound like it's a perfect world, because it's not.
Right.
But if you have a default to fall into at any time, just doing what you're told is a really good place to land.
Right. Well, it's funny you say that, because I've been preaching to myself my sermon from last Sunday, which is, as we're sitting here now on Wednesday, around about lunchtime, soldier, athlete, farmer. I've been preaching to myself a couple of points in this week already, what I said about being a soldier, and the crucial factor that Paul draws attention to is not soldiers get to fight.
Mm-hmm.
It's that soldiers get to do what they're told.
Mm-hmm.
Nobody in first century Rome is remotely interested in how the new recruits feel about
Mm-hmm.
their orders. In fact, you had to swear the sacramentum when you signed up for the Roman army. And the sacramentum was this oath where you
Mm-hmm.
basically you promised to follow every order that the emperor would pass down to you. And the only way to leave was by retiring, dishonorable discharge, or death.
Mm-hmm.
There's no way of getting out early. You've signed up now. You belong to this institution, the Roman army. And that image, I mean, Paul has had a Roman centurion, or soldier at least, standing in his front room for 2 years in his first imprisonment. He knows all about what it's like to be a Roman soldier. That image Paul applies straight to the Christian life, and particularly in 2 Timothy, it's the life of Timothy, a younger Christian minister. But insofar as that's a character trait that Christians ought to embrace, then it's like, yeah, just do it. If we just did what we were told, wouldn't the world be a better place?
Well, I mean, it again makes me think about the kind of what we've been talking about. How do you show your faith in a world, and again, without being somebody who just wants to argue?
Mm-hmm.
What if a sign of a Christian is somebody who, not in matters where you're being told to do something that is sinful, of course, but wow, I just hired this person who's a Christian, and everything I've told them to do, they're doing to the utmost.
Right. Yeah.
Whereas you're outdoing other people and doing what you're told.
Yes.
Because that's what we hold as a central part of our faith, is obedience to Christ. So we're practicing obedience in our faith. I don't know that there should be a real disconnect.
Right. Well, and this is an intriguing thing. You know, obviously there is a Acts 2, Acts 4 caveat. Like you're not going to obey an earthly authority in sinning against Christ in some kind of normative way. But it feels to me often that discussions about the proper scope of human authorities basically start and end there. And this is not at all to deny the place of civil disobedience, or of, there'll be circumstances in which a soldier receives an order that's an unlawful order, but we end up turning those exceptions into a kind of normative central pole for our reflection on relations to authorities. And you forget the weight of the New Testament, right? Books like 1 Peter was written when Nero is the emperor, or Romans. They're the two classic texts, 1 Peter 2 and Romans 13. And of course, they're not without caveat, unconditioned obedience to every human authority. Mm-hmm. That's not what it says. But there's an astonishing clarity of expectation that it's not just that Christians do what they're told. It is that. Mm-hmm. But it's that as you do what you're told as a Christian, you will bring glory to Christ and credit to the gospel. Mm-hmm. In 1 Peter 2. And you're honouring those ministers of Christ, Romans 13, that the Lord has put in place. Now, you don't honour them by indulging their fantasies to be divine or greater than they truly are.
No.
You don't honour them by obeying them when they're commanding you to sin. But you do honour them by doing stuff you'd rather not do. And then you honour Christ as well.
Yeah, this kind of modifying something Doug Wilson said about our theology should come out of our fingertips.
Yes.
In the workplace, your faith should come out of your fingertips. The way you do things.
Yes.
And when you do it like that, it that does influence culture. Exactly what I'm talking about. And the fast food worker you were talking about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Part of that is doing what you're told, and you do what you're told because you believe in doing what you're told.
Yeah, and this my boss knows more about how this business works than I do.
I do, and so if I do what I'm told, and now all of a sudden what comes from it in even a short period of time.
Yeah.
And I'll tell you this in business is that I've said this to everybody at my workplace. Adults are just taller children. like we still have to say things multiple times to people, and I'm not ashamed to say it as a believer. I need to be told things multiple times so I can really work on them, learn them out, remember them, do those kind of things. So don't be surprised when you hear things multiple times. But if we all
just normal.
Yeah, it's just
Yeah,
but if we actually put effort into like listening and just doing what we're told, like even in a faithful way, you can take joy in doing something very well,
right,
and you in that doing that thing is exactly what changes culture.
right. I wanted to get your reaction. Just one other thing. I know time is pressing on. I
Yeah.
need to let you go, but um, I was prompted to reflect on this just yesterday in a conversation with a couple of people here at All Saints, and it's about that. It relates to that issue of we're all just taller children. Now, what does a good parent do for a child who steps out of line?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there is discipline, there is maybe even chastisement and correction,
Mm-hmm.
and there's an not exact parallel, but there's an analog of that in the employee relationship and in lots of other relationships. But what is it that trains a child? And I was struck by Titus 2:11 and 12. The grace of God that brings salvation has appeared, um, training us to renounce godliness and worldly passions. And then the first positive thing that the grace of God does is teaching us to live self-controlled lives.
Mm-hmm.
So you've got a cluster of unexpected statements about how we change. First, it is the grace of God that transforms us. It's the recognition that, let's say, as a child with a parent, I stepped out of line. I've done something wrong. I've been disciplined. Now I'm being given another chance.
Mm-hmm.
Isn't that wonderful?
Mm-hmm.
Maybe there's a faint echo in the employer-employee relationship. You're saying, listen, this isn't how to do it. I mean, you can't keep doing this, right?
Mm-hmm.
We're going to have to fire you if you do this
Mm-hmm.
10 times a week. But come on, you can do better than this.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, I've been given another chance.
Mm-hmm.
God has graciously put me in a place where even though I failed to fulfill my obligations, I'm being given opportunity again by His grace to have another crack at this. And then I was trying to figure out, why is it self-control that is top of the list? And I think partly it might be because Titus is living on the island of Crete, where there's a fair number of lazy brutes and evil gluttons who lack self-control. But what struck me is self-control is the application of the best that we're capable of to those times when we habitually produce less. Like in our best moments, we're actually all capable of working hard, being gracious, being polite, being loving to our spouses, restraining our foolish speech, refraining from sinful temptations, curbing our lust. In our best moments, every spirit-filled Christian, which is to say every Christian, is capable of that.
Mm-hmm.
So why do we not always do that? And the answer is because we're not always at our best moments. And what do we lack at that moment? Self-control. We lack the capacity to have transferred into that moment of need and temptation the dispositions that the Spirit of God has actually put in us. That, be what you are is what Paul kind of says that in the second half of most of his letters. You've been transformed in Christ. Now you've got to live this out. And it's God's grace that has transformed us and given us that opportunity. It's a lot for you to react to.
No. I love hearing it all, because I was thinking that you started off with, we don't want to heal the wound lightly, and certainly not, but I also don't want anybody to think there's not joy in all the things that we talked about here. I know I said obey a lot and just do what you're told a lot,
Yeah.
but Jesus said obedience is for our joy.
Right, yes.
And I can tell you that just in my own life, I want to obey more. I want to learn to obey more. I want to keep the faith. And one of the things I've thought about is, through this age, like, what is it to keep the faith through this age versus ages past?
Yes.
And what does that look like? And to fight this fight, it's going to require the joy that we carry inside, knowing that we are forgiven. We always have another chance as we repent.
Yeah.
But we also have the joy of fighting a fight, not by flesh and blood, like in this world, and conquering. And when we conquer, we bring joy in places maybe that was lacking before.
Justin Durst, thank you for joining us on the All Saints podcast.
Thanks for having me.
God bless you guys. Bye for now.